Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. As promised, I'm excited to share an audio preview of John's book, a project that is deeply special to me. This book was written during the most difficult time of his life when he was battling cancer. John poured his heart and soul into this manuscript, even as he faced the physical toll of the disease and the uncertainty of how much time he had left. When John was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in February 2021, he was told he may only have 2 to 3 months to live. At the time, I couldn't fully grasp the sudden turn of this event in our lives. Looking back, I truly believe that God's miracles extended John's time, allowing him to complete not only this last book, but also the other four. We self published the three books during the 2 years John bravely fought cancer. My greatest hope was that he could hold his finished books in his hands before he left us. He never got to see this one and the last part of the allegorical trilogy coming up. I will read for you. Church, we have a problem if we don't understand and accept being salt of the earth. When society begins to rot, often the church casts blame rather than hope. We should remember that in the days of Jesus, as in all days, society was also rotting. Yet he did not condemn those who seemed to be responsible for societal decay: prostitutes, dishonest businessmen, social outcasts, criminals sentenced to death, foreigners, etc. He recognized them as lost children, victims of a decaying society. He did not condemn the victims, but rather held the spiritual leaders of the church as the ones responsible for depriving them of needed salt. If the meat is rotting, it's not the meat's fault, it's the fault of the salt. Many people think today that society is in as chaotic condition as it has been for many years. If so, what is the message of the church to offer curative salt? How does the church present itself and its message so that society can see that there is a preservative to save it from the seemingly unstoppable spoiling that is corrupting its neighborhoods and communities? A response often given by the church is that we are living in the last days and must expect an increase in persecution, a slackening of morality, and general falling away of society from the church. Jesus tells us that no one knows when the last days will fall upon the world, so until then, we must work believing that rejection of our message is not inevitable. After graduation from the seminary, I was sent to pastor a church in Los Angeles. I arrived in 1977. In the 1980s and 1990s, the social and spiritual of Los Angeles was torn apart by the flooding of its streets with cocaine, heroin, and crystal meth. The number of members of street gangs was in the tens of thousands. Not gang members, but individual gangs. Murders surpassed 2,500 annually, which means that every day someone, usually a young person, was murdered on the streets of Los Angeles. Compare that to 200 that were killed in the year 2020. 2,500 compared to 200, incarcerations rose astronomically, and the 1980s and 1990s grotesque numbers of young people in prison culminated in the bestowal of the title The Incarceration of the World upon America, knocking its previous title of the Land of the Free from its beaten and bloody brow. It seemed that everything positive and helpful was in retreat. An entire generation lost with little confidence among the parents or sociologists that the generation to follow would be able to outrun the sins of the parents. Books were written by Christian leaders in the comforts of their offices, citing studies that demonstrated that outreaches to hardcore gang members was futile. Such efforts would only result in loss of precious resources as well as the very real possibility of a pastor in such an area being shot down in his study, or before his congregation on a Sunday morning, or in his home after a break in if he was foolish enough to live in the area he was living. The salt was in danger of losing its saltiness. What would happen if that indeed did happen? You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Matthew 5:13 to 14. A little study theme in the Old Testament revolves around the concept of landmarks or boundaries that have been set by God. They are to be honored, not discarded. God is a God of order. He places people and ministries in locations and situations for a purpose, and He gives all the resources necessary for those purposes to be accomplished. Looking at my lack of experience and high discomfort level with urban ministry, I came from a small lumber town in the state of Washington. I lacked confidence that I could wage a successful ministry in Los Angeles during the time of the great chaos of the late 1970s to 90s. However, true to the teaching of landmarks, God did not abandon the little church I was called to serve. The district of churches to which my church belonged had no more confidence in its future than I did. The first week of my ministry, several representatives came to visit and told me not to be discouraged, that the plan was for me to assist the church to die, and in 2 years I would be transferred to a different church. However, the verses which spoke of landmarks taught otherwise. I have been the pastor at that same church for the past 45 years. The demographics of the neighborhood surrounding the church have changed from predominantly white to African American to Latino. The church has been destroyed by arson and temporarily closed because of earthquake damage, and most recently forced to have recorded videos of services because of COVID 19. A gang member was shot and left for dead in its parking lot, as well as gangs holding clandestine meetings late at night in unlit corners of its property. A cocaine rock house was established directly across from the street and operated by an infamous prison gang. Eventually, it was destroyed by a violent police raid. A woman and her 2 children were murdered in their home several blocks from the church, and several blocks the other direction, a motorcycle policeman was shot down. In between those two attacks, a member of our church was shot and left paralyzed for life as he was standing up front as the best man during a wedding service. The small local park was taken over by a gang, and any visitors were told that you won't like it here, so you should take your children and leave. Yet the small church of less than 100 members survived and has ministered to gang members who murdered, robbed, and sold drugs. Several of them were touched by the power of God's Spirit and have become followers of Jesus. The church has rejoiced at being chosen by God to witness and participate in the deliverance from drugs and alcohol of individuals it has ministered to. Because the church is small and the number of these individual stories is few, it passes unnoticed by the church at large. However, when it is multiplied by the dozens, and perhaps hundreds of churches which followed the teaching of landmarks and did not flee when facing difficult ministries in a changed neighborhood. The numbers of changed lives become impressive, certainly in the hundreds and maybe in the thousands. Once a church believes that they are placed in the neighborhood, not by chance, but by God's divine purpose, then it can also believe that God will provide whatever and whomever is needed for that purpose to be accomplished. The church must ask the Holy Spirit to open their eyes and see those from whom they were previously alienated through the eyes of Jesus, not through their own prejudiced viewpoints. In doing so, it also must remember the words of Jesus when he sent out his disciples two by two. He told them to be gentle as doves, but wise as serpents. We must view the angry, racist, violent, mocking people, enslaved by drugs and the pain of broken homes, who rage against the church, as our brothers and sisters who are spiritually blind and dead. They are incapable of making any spiritually wise decisions until the Holy Spirit falls upon them and gives them life and sight. However, this gentle compassion must be accomplished by the understanding that they are under the control of the evil one and must be ministered to with caution and wisdom. Thank you for listening. If this podcast has moved you, I would appreciate that you share this with others so that it's a way to spread the message, to open opportunities in fellowship and prayers with the believers in Jesus Christ. You can drop a prayer or let us know your thoughts on the comment below. May you grow in His wisdom and guidance. Until next time, join me in the next episode of Lilies and Ravens podcast. God bless.